Just a few thoughts here from me. Day 6 of the Afghan crisis, President Biden's press conference. Look, as usual, as Jackie Heinrich suggested, as usual, this presser raises more questions than he answered. First of all, our NATO allies are furious with us. I don't care what the president says. And there's no serious discussions of a new government in Kabul. The rescue mission is centered at the Karzai airport. There's 6,000 U.S. troops there, but you have to get there in order to leave the country. And unlike Britain and France, whose troops are seeking their citizens in Kabul and elsewhere, they're going way beyond the airport, the U.S. is apparently just stuck in the airport. Because to quote the president, it's not our mission, meaning not our mission to leave the airport. Well, that's nonsense. Now, other things here, as of last weekend, some 18,000 Afghans who were allies of us had applied for these special immigrant visas, CIVs. We have no idea, ultimately, how many are going to need help. I will tell you this. When the Taliban finds Afghans who assisted the U.S. and the NATO forces, they're going to do very bad things to them. They will kill them. And I don't know what we're going to do about that. Meanwhile, there's over 10,000 Americans sprinkled throughout the capital and the rest of the country, but no one really knows how many there are. No one knows how we're going to find them, and therefore no one knows how we're going to help them to leave. Now, additionally, I keep reading about political meetings in Kabul between former Afghan government officials like Hamid Karzai, Dr. Abdullah. These are pro-Americans. They've been meeting with Taliban representatives, apparently. You've got Northern Alliance people engaged. But no one in the U.S. government seems to want to talk about this. And I keep nagging about it every night. I'm trying to move this story forward. There has to be some kind of provisional government, which will require recognition or not. I don't know what the negotiations are. If there's no coalition, then you're going to be left with the Taliban creating this Islamic state of Afghanistan that they're already talking about. Now, that may be recognized by China and or Russia, but it will be a disaster for the United States and for the NATO allies in the West. A terrorist disaster. And again, as I mentioned to Jackie Heinrich, President Biden said today there's no sign of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. But in fact, experts are saying al-Qaeda groups are sprinkled throughout Afghan provinces. Pakistan, of course, is going to help incubate the terrorists. And then we learn in the Wall Street Journal scoop story today that Putin doesn't want any American counterterrorism in Central Asia. And apparently, he made a deal with Biden at the G7 summit to that effect. Huh? We just learned that today. I believe that summit was in May, or somebody correct me, May or June. But none of that got out. And we have got to be in there because of the terrorist threat as well as 100 other reasons. So this is a nasty story. It's unfinished. It's unclear. It's hard to get facts. And we're going to grope our way through this because this is such a major thing. Look, the only good news, I'm always looking for good news. The IMF and the World Bank and the U.S. Treasury, I guess, are withholding cash from the Taliban. And I assume, and again, I have more to dig in on this too, but I assume on this financial side of the story that we are in touch, we being the U.S. Treasury, presumably the Federal Reserve, along with the IMF, with all the commercial banks so that the Afghan Taliban, I don't want to call it Afghan, the Taliban assets are frozen. Now, the IMF loans will not be made, and we know that the Taliban are a bunch of drug dealers, and a lot of their money comes from selling drugs. You know, holier than thou with Sharia law doesn't seem to stop the fact that they're a bunch of drug dealers. So we can't, I don't know how we're going to hammer that, but at least the IMF and the banks, I hope, will keep the cash frozen. That's a little bit of leverage we have for this governmental story. But there has to be a government, folks. At some point, this will have to be resolved, either peacefully or through more bloodshed. And I wish the Bidens would be forthcoming about this. Somebody has got to know about the talks going on in Kabul by the different factions. And that was always part of the Trump deal, to go back to that issue. The Trump deal was a peaceful resolution between Taliban and the Afghan government, then President Ghani, okay? Apparently, that was never concluded. And so Biden could have withdrawn this whole effort to leave. He could have walked away from any so-called deal, or we could have used air combat bombing as the Taliban started taking over provinces. But none of that happened, and it's all left dangling right now. At some point, there will be a government, and it may be quite hostile to the United States. All right, put it all aside. The stock market had a nice Friday rally. Remember the stock market? It was up over 240 points. So that suggests the economy is okay. And look, America's going to survive this. We've seen a lot worse than the Afghan problem. It's just that this is one of these big issues: treasure, people, lives, military, allies, terrorism, the original idea, clean out the terrorists. It's a tragedy because none of these end game ideas, none of these end game motives or objectives have been fulfilled. And it's a tough one. We will survive this. We are still the greatest country in the world. Joe Biden's not going to bring us down. We've seen worse than Biden, I think. I'll scratch my head. Maybe I'll take that back. We've seen many as bad as Biden. And his ideas on foreign policy are just about as bad as his ideas on economic policy. So stocks are rising. That's a good sign. I always find solace in the stock market. Let's move on.